Marriage is a complicated dance. Sometimes you lead, sometimes you follow, but it should always be with the same partner. What people don't tell you is how other dancers might cut in: parents, in-laws, friends, all thinking they know the steps better than you do. I learned this lesson the hard way, and maybe by sharing my story, I can help someone else see the warning signs before it's too late. My name is Joshua Bennett. I'm 32 years old, and until last year, I thought I had everything figured out. Back when I first met Abigail, I was fresh out of college with a mountain of student debt and a degree that hadn't exactly opened doors the way I'd hoped. The economy was in the tank, and like thousands of other graduates, I was just trying to get my foot in somewhere, anywhere. I remember the night we met. My buddy Dave was throwing one of his famous house parties, the kind where you meet people from all walks of life. I was standing in the kitchen, nursing a cheap beer and wondering if I should call it a night when she walked in. Abigail Foster had this confidence about her. Not the loud, look at me kind, but a quiet assurance that drew you in. "That beer any good?" she asked, pointing to the bottle in my hand. I laughed. "About as good as my job prospects." She smiled, and something clicked between us. We spent the rest of the night in the corner of Dave's kitchen, talking about everything from favorite books to worst job interviews. Abigail was working at a marketing firm, already on her way up the ladder while I was still trying to find the bottom rung. We didn't rush into dating. For weeks, we just met for coffee or lunch, getting to know each other without the pressure. I appreciated that she never made me feel small about where I was in life. When I finally landed a decent job, she was the first person I called. "See, I told you something would come through," she said, genuine happiness in her voice. "We should celebrate." That celebration turned into our first official date, and from there, things just felt right. We had our arguments, sure, but they were always fair fights. No low blows, no dragging up past mistakes. We talked things out, found compromises, and moved forward together. A year into our relationship, I got a promotion. It wasn't huge, but it meant I could finally start making a dent in my student loans. I felt like I was getting somewhere, like I could offer Abigail more than just potential. So one night, after dinner at her favorite restaurant, I got down on one knee. "Josh, are you serious?" she gasped, eyes wide. "Never been more serious about anything," I replied, holding up the modest ring I'd spent months saving for. She said yes, and for a while, everything was perfect. We moved into a small apartment, started planning our future, and for the first time since graduation, I felt like I was on solid ground. Then came the day I had to meet her parents. Abigail had mentioned them before, of course. Her dad, Richard, worked in finance, and her mom, Eleanor, was heavily involved in the local country club scene. They sounded a bit stuffy, but I figured I could win them over with some charm and genuine respect. Man, was I wrong about that. "Just be yourself," Abigail said as we pulled into the driveway of their sprawling suburban home. "They're going to love you." I straightened my tie, took a deep breath, and prepared to meet the people who had raised the woman I loved. Little did I know I was walking into an arena, not a family dinner, and the match was already rigged against me. The Foster's house looked like something out of Architectural Digest. Pristine lawn, manicured hedges, and a 3-car garage, housing vehicles worth more than my annual salary. I squared my shoulders and followed Abigail to the door, carrying a bottle of wine I'd spent too much on. Eleanor Foster answered the door with a practiced smile that didn't reach her eyes. She was tall, blonde, and immaculately dressed in designer clothes that screamed old money. "Abigail, darling," she exclaimed, embracing her daughter while barely acknowledging me. Richard Foster appeared behind her, silver-haired and imposing in a cashmere sweater. His handshake was firm to the point of painful. "So you're Joshua," he said, sizing me up. "What exactly do you do?" Before I could answer, Eleanor ushered us into a dining room that could have seated 20. The table settings probably cost more than my first car. "Josh just got promoted," Abigail offered proudly. "Is that so?" Richard replied, pouring himself a scotch without offering me one. "And what are your long-term prospects?" I explained my career path confidently, emphasizing my recent accomplishments and future plans. I prepared for this, knowing they'd want to see substance. "And your debt situation?" Eleanor interjected, cutting me off mid-sentence. Abigail mentioned student loans. The bluntness caught me off guard. "I'm on track with my payments. My promotion has helped accelerate that." Eleanor and Richard exchanged a look I couldn't quite decipher. Responsible debt management is one thing, Richard said, swirling his scotch. But starting a marriage with financial baggage is another entirely. I felt my jaw tighten. With all due respect, sir, I see it as an investment in my future. Our future. I worked through college, maintained a 3.8 GPA, and landed a solid job despite the recession. The room went silent. Abigail squeezed my hand under the table. Well, Eleanor finally said, at least you have ambition. The rest of dinner was a minefield of subtle digs and backhanded compliments. When Abigail mentioned our apartment, Eleanor asked when we planned to move to a real home. When I mentioned my parents' small business, Richard commented on the failure rate of family enterprises. Throughout it all, I maintained my composure, refusing to be baited. When Richard challenged my political views, I engaged respectfully, but firmly, backing up my positions with facts. I could tell he wasn't used to being contradicted. As we left, Eleanor hugged Abigail and whispered something that made her frown. To me, she simply nodded. In the car, I didn't immediately speak, processing the evening. They'll warm up, Abigail said weakly. I turned to her with a half-smile. No, they won't. But that's okay. I'm not marrying them. I'm marrying you. She smiled back, relieved. But something in her eyes told me this was just the beginning of a much longer battle. Our wedding was smaller than Abigail initially wanted. The Fosters pushed for a country club extravaganza with 300 guests, but I stood my ground. We compromised on a charming vineyard ceremony with 100 people who actually mattered to us. It's our day, I reminded Abigail when Eleanor tried changing the venue 3 weeks before. Not a networking event for your dad. The ceremony was perfect despite Eleanor's pinched expression when my college buddies hooped during our first kiss. Richard's toast managed to mention Abigail's potential without acknowledging me directly. I didn't care. Abigail was radiant, and she was my wife. The first 6 months of marriage were everything I'd hoped for. We settled into our apartment, balancing work and time together. I was putting in extra hours, climbing the ladder, determined to prove myself. Abigail supported me, bringing dinner to the office during late nights and celebrating each small victory. Then came our first real disagreement. About money, of course. Mom thinks we should open a joint account at her bank, Abigail mentioned casually over dinner. We already have a joint account, I replied, confused. But this one would have better. Oversight. I set down my fork. Oversight from whom exactly? She hesitated. My dad's financial advisor would manage it. So, your parents want access to our finances? I asked directly. Not access, Josh. Just guidance. We're young, and Dad has connections. We're adults who can manage our own money. I interrupted firmly. I've been handling my finances since I was 18. We don't need supervision. Abigail frowned. You don't have to be so stubborn. They're trying to help. Help or control. There's a difference. The argument escalated until Abigail grabbed her phone and stormed into the bedroom. 15 minutes later, she emerged. Her expression changed. Mom says you're being unreasonable. Dad set up accounts like this for all her friends' children. That stopped me cold. You called your mother? In the middle of our disagreement. I needed perspective, she defended. No, you needed backup. Our marriage isn't a democracy with your parents getting a vote. The argument ended in tense silence. The next morning, I thought we'd talk it through, but Abigail was already on the phone with Eleanor when I woke up, speaking in hushed tones that stopped when I entered the kitchen. It became a pattern. Every disagreement, every decision, somehow involved the Fosters. Their opinions began reshaping Abigail's views on everything from our living situation to my career choices. The woman who once admired my ambition now questioned my every move, armed with Richard's professional insights. I was no longer just married to Abigail. I was married to the entire Foster family. For years into our marriage, my career took off. I landed a major client, earned a substantial bonus, and finally cleared my student debt. We moved to a larger apartment in a better neighborhood, and for the first time, I felt financially stable. Abigail was proud, at least initially. We should have dinner with my parents this weekend, she suggested. Dad will be impressed with your progress. I nodded, though seeking Richard's approval had long stopped being my goal. Still, I thought maybe my success would finally change how the Fosters viewed me. The dinner started pleasantly enough. Richard even offered me a scotch, a first. I detailed my recent accomplishments, keeping my tone measured despite my pride in the work. Not bad. Richard conceded, swirling his drink. Though in this market, you could be doing better with the right connections. Eleanor nodded. The Harrington son-in-law just made partner at his firm. He's younger than you, I believe. Just like that, my achievements were diminished. I bit my tongue, reminding myself this wasn't about them. On the drive home, Abigail dropped a bombshell. Dad thinks you should consider a different investment strategy. He says your 401k allocations are too aggressive. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel. And how exactly does your father know about my 401k allocations? She looked away. I might have shown him your statements when he asked about our financial planning. I pulled the car over, my pulse pounding in my ears. You shared my private financial information without asking me. He's just trying to help, Josh. Why are you always so defensive when it comes to my parents? The argument continued at home, voices rising until Abigail retreated to the bathroom with her phone. I heard her muffled voice through the door, undoubtedly seeking Eleanor's counsel yet again. When she emerged, her eyes were red, but her stance was combative. Mom says you're being controlling about money. Dad says it's a sign of insecurity. Something in me snapped. This ends now, Abigail. Your parents don't get a vote in our marriage. They don't get access to my personal financial information. And they sure as hell don't get to diagnose my supposed insecurities. They're my family, she shot back. And I'm your husband. Or at least I thought I was. Sometimes it feels like I'm just the guy who happens to live with their daughter while they make all the decisions. She stared at me like I'd grown a second head. You're overreacting. This is normal family involvement. No, I said firmly. This is not normal. This is 3 against 1, and I'm done playing that game. As I slept on the couch that night, I realized with crushing clarity that no amount of success would ever be enough for the Fosters. And worse, Abigail couldn't or wouldn't see it. The next year marked a significant shift in our marriage. On the surface, things appeared normal. We hosted dinner parties, took weekend trips, and maintained the image of a happy couple. But beneath that facade, a canyon was forming between us. Every decision became a battleground. When I suggested saving for a down payment on a house, Abigail immediately consulted her father, who deemed my plan financially naive. When I considered switching companies for better advancement opportunities, Eleanor warned Abigail about job hoppers over their weekly lunch. The Foster family group chat buzzed constantly on Abigail's phone. Dinners at their house increased from monthly to weekly, often scheduled when I had late meetings. I began feeling like an outsider in my own marriage. Your mother called again. I mentioned one evening. That's the 3rd time today. Abigail didn't look up from her phone. She's helping me plan the dinner party. The one we decided to keep small. Just close friends. She sighed. Mom thinks we should invite Dad's new partners. It's good networking. It's supposed to be a casual evening with friends, not a business function, I argued. Why do you always fight every suggestion my parents make? She snapped. Not everything is a control issue, Josh. But it was. The Fosters had opinions on everything from our vacation plans to our retirement savings. What infuriated me most wasn't their interference, but how Abigail couldn't see it for what it was. The pivotal moment came when I discovered Abigail had given her parents a key to our apartment. I came home to find your mother rearranging our living room, I said, struggling to keep my voice even. She was trying to help. You know, I've been busy at work. That's not the point. This is our home, Abigail, our private space. They're family, she insisted. You act like they're intruders when they enter our home without permission. Yes, that's exactly what they are. After another heated argument that ended with Abigail calling Eleanor, I reached a breaking point. I took the spare key from the drawer and changed the locks the next day. When Abigail discovered what I'd done, her face flushed with anger. My parents will be humiliated. How could you? How could I establish a basic boundary in my own home? I asked incredulously. Is that really where we are? You're being selfish and immature, she hissed, reaching for her phone. I gently took it from her hand. No, we're going to talk this through, just us. No calling for backup. The look she gave me was one I'll never forget, like I'd violated some fundamental rule of her existence. In that moment, I realized how completely the Fosters had programmed my wife to depend on their guidance for everything. What happened to us, Abigail? I asked quietly. When did we stop being a team? She had no answer, and that silence spoke volumes. The fight that changed everything started over something trivial, a leaking kitchen faucet. I'd promised to fix it over the weekend, but got pulled into an emergency project at work that consumed my Saturday. It's been dripping for 3 days. Abigail complained Sunday morning, arms crossed. If you don't care enough to fix it, just say so. I told you I had to work yesterday. I replied, trying to stay calm. I'll handle it today after I finish these reports. She huffed. A leaky faucet isn't the end of the world, Josh, but your reliability is the issue. You know what my mom says. I cut her off. I don't give a damn what your mother says about my reliability or anything else. Abigail's eyes widened. Excuse me. You heard me. I'm tired of every disagreement turning into a referendum where your parents are the judges. They give good advice. You're just too stubborn to see it. It's not advice, it's control. I shot back. And you hand it to them on a silver platter. Her face flushed with anger. You know what? Mom was right about you all along. You're too insecure to accept help, too proud to admit when others know better. Maybe I do deserve better. Those words hit like a physical blow. After everything I'd built, everything I'd accomplished, she still saw me through her mother's disparaging lens. Go to your parents, I said quietly. Take the weekend. Think about whether you want to be married to me or them. Fine, she snapped, grabbing her purse. Maybe some distance will help you see how unreasonable you're being. After she left, I slumped onto the couch, emotionally drained. I'd spent years trying to prove myself to people who had decided I wasn't good enough before they even met me. Years watching my wife become increasingly dependent on her parents' approval for every decision. When Abigail returned Sunday night, her demeanor had completely changed. Instead of continuing our discussion, she acted as if nothing had happened. But when I mentioned the argument, her expression hardened. My parents think you owe them an apology, she stated flatly. Mom was really hurt by what you said. I stared at her in disbelief. I didn't say anything about your mother to her face. But you disrespected her in our conversation, and that's just as bad. So after I asked for space to discuss our marriage, you spent the entire weekend letting your parents dictate the terms of our reconciliation? She wouldn't meet my eyes. They're my family, Josh. They deserve respect. And what about me? What do I deserve in this marriage? Her silence was my answer. After a fight with my in-laws, everyone was ignoring what really mattered. Even my wife. They wanted an apology, but I was done compromising. The realization hit me like a thunderbolt. This would never change. In the weeks following our argument, I noticed a disturbing pattern. Abigail's phone would buzz with text notifications from a new group chat, one I wasn't part of. When I glanced at her screen one evening, I caught the name, Family Only. The exclusion stung, but what happened next was worse. Invitations to foster family events stopped coming my way. Abigail would casually mention she was heading to Sunday brunch or her father's birthday dinner, alone. They think it's better if I come by myself for a while, she explained weakly, just until things cool down. I nodded, swallowing my pride. And you're okay with that? With them cutting your husband out? She avoided my eyes. It's temporary. They're still upset about what you said. What exactly did I say that was so terrible? That I wanted boundaries in our marriage. You call them controlling, Josh. You rejected their help constantly. I leaned forward. Is that what they told you? Because what I actually said was that our marriage needed to be between us, not us and your parents. The conversation went nowhere. Abigail had rewritten history with her parents' version of events, where I was the ungrateful son-in-law who had disrespected them after all they'd done for us. At work, I buried myself in projects, staying late to avoid coming home to the Cold War that our apartment had become. I was performing better than ever professionally. Ironically enough, nothing focuses the mind like a crumbling personal life. One evening, I came home earlier than expected and found Eleanor sitting in our living room, sorting through mail on our coffee table. She looked up, startled. Joshua, I didn't expect you so early. I set my briefcase down slowly. Evidently. What are you doing with our mail, Eleanor? Just helping Abigail organize. You know how overwhelmed she gets. My wife emerged from the bedroom, freezing when she saw us. Josh, you're home early. Yes, and I found your mother going through her personal mail. Care to explain how she got in? I thought we agreed, no more surprise visits. Abigail's expression hardened. I gave her the new key. She needs access in case of emergencies. And our mail is an emergency? Don't be difficult. Eleanor cut in. Abigail asked for my help. I turned to my wife. Is that true? You asked your mother to come sort through our financial documents and bills while I was at work. Abigail crossed her arms defensively. Mom knows more about organizing these things than you do. The betrayal was so blatant, so unapologetic, that I couldn't form words for a moment. When I finally spoke, my voice was dangerously calm. Eleanor, please leave. Now. To my surprise, she complied, gathering her purse with a sniff. At the door, she turned to Abigail. Call me later. After she left, Abigail exploded. How dare you speak to my mother that way in our home? How dare you give her access to our private information behind my back? I countered. This isn't just boundary crossing anymore, Abigail. This is betrayal. She shook her head, already reaching for her phone. You're being dramatic. I'm calling Dad. In that moment, I knew with absolute certainty that I'd lost my wife to the foster family machine. The weeks following the mail incident were tense, but quiet. Abigail and I operated like polite roommates, careful not to trigger another confrontation. I focused on work, putting in extra hours on a major account that could mean a significant promotion. Throughout our marriage, Richard had always offered his professional insights on my career moves. First it was suggestions, then stronger recommendations, and eventually outright criticism when I didn't follow his preferred path. I'd managed to keep his influence at arm's length, though Abigail constantly relayed his opinions about which projects I should pursue or which company connections I should cultivate. Then came a company dinner where spouses were expected to attend. Abigail dressed up, smiled for colleagues, and played the part of the supportive wife perfectly. On the surface, things appeared normal. Walking into that event with her on my arm, one might have thought we had the perfect marriage. Later that week, my boss called me in his office. Josh, is everything okay at home? He asked, uncharacteristically concerned. I maintained a neutral expression. Everything's fine. Why do you ask? He shifted uncomfortably. I received a call from Richard Foster. He mentioned his daughter was having concerns about your work-life balance. He suggested we might be putting too much pressure on you. The blood drained from my face. My father-in-law called you. He's a significant client at Henderson & Partners. We've crossed paths at several functions. Of course, Richard had finally escalated from offering unwanted career advice to actively undermining me behind my back. What started as helpful suggestions had evolved into direct interference with my professional reputation. I thanked my boss for his concern and assured him all was well, but inside I was seething. The Fosters had crossed the final line, moving from criticizing my career choices to actually sabotaging my professional standing. That evening, I confronted Abigail. Did you know your father called my boss today? She froze momentarily before her shoulders slumped. He mentioned he might reach out. I told him you were working too many hours. You told your father to interfere with my job? I couldn't keep the incredulity from my voice. It wasn't interference. He was concerned about you, about us. This wasn't concern, Abigail. This was your father taking his meddling to the next level. He's gone from criticizing my career choices to actively undermining me professionally. She shook her head. You're twisting everything. Dad cares about your well-being. He cares about control. I corrected her. First it was suggesting career moves, then it was criticizing my choices, and now it's going behind my back to my boss. Can't you see the pattern? That's not true. She reached for her phone, her reflexive move in any conflict. Go ahead, I said quietly. Call them. Get your instructions for this argument too. Tears filled her eyes, but she didn't deny it. As she retreated to the bedroom with her phone, I sat at the kitchen table, a strange calm washing over me. Years of fighting Richard's increasing interference in my career had culminated in this, him directly contacting my boss to undermine me. When Abigail emerged from the bedroom, her expression was steel. My parents think you're being paranoid and ungrateful. Dad was only trying to help ease pressure on you. He has connections that could actually help your career if you weren't so stubborn. I looked at my wife, this woman who had once believed in me, who had once been my partner, and realized she was too far gone. The Foster family had completely reprogrammed her to serve their agenda. I want a divorce, I said quietly. Her eyes widened in shock. For the first time in years, I'd said something her parents hadn't prepared her for. Abigail's shocked expression quickly morphed into anger. Divorce? Are you insane? We're going through a rough patch, not ending our marriage. I shook my head. This isn't a rough patch. This is a fundamental breakdown. You've chosen your parents over our partnership at every turn. That's not fair, she protested, already reaching for her phone. I need to call Mom. Of course you do, I said quietly. That's exactly my point. She retreated to the bedroom, and I heard her muffled voice through the door. I didn't need to hear the words to know the conversation. She was getting instructions, preparing for the battle ahead. That night, I slept on the couch again, staring at the ceiling as a plan formed in my mind. The next morning, Abigail announced she was spending the weekend at her parents' house to think things through. I nodded, feigning resignation. Maybe some space will help, I offered. She seemed surprised by my easy capitulation. As soon as her car pulled away Friday afternoon, I sprang into action. I withdrew a significant amount from my personal account, money I'd been saving for our future, money that now would fund my freedom. I left the joint account untouched. I didn't want her stranded. I packed efficiently: clothes, important documents, a few personal items with sentimental value. Everything else I left behind. The material possessions meant nothing compared to reclaiming my life. Next, I contacted a real estate agent friend and arranged for a month-to-month rental in a neighboring city. I wouldn't be far, but far enough that the Fosters couldn't just drop by unannounced. Finally, I booked a one-way flight to my brother's place in Colorado. I needed breathing room, time to clear my head before facing the inevitable storm. I left no note. After years of having my words twisted and used against me, silence seemed the only safe response. I simply closed the door behind me and walked away from the life I'd spent years trying to maintain. By Saturday evening, I was sitting on my brother's deck, watching the sunset over the mountains. My phone had been buzzing constantly since that morning. Abigail must have returned home to find me gone. I turned it off without reading the messages. "You okay?" my brother asked, handing me a beer. "Better than I've been in years," I replied honestly. "What are you going to do now?" I took a long sip before answering. "Live my life on my terms. No committee, no permission slips, no constant judgment." After a fight with my in-laws that left everyone ignoring my needs and feelings, even my wife, I'd chosen to leave rather than apologize. I bought a one-way ticket out, and by the time I noticed I was gone, it was too late to pull me back into their web of control. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe again. Whatever came next, at least the decisions would be mine. 3 weeks passed at my brother's place in Colorado. I found a local coffee shop with good Wi-Fi where I could work remotely, keeping my performance strong despite the personal turmoil. My boss had been surprisingly understanding when I explained I was dealing with family issues. My phone contained hundreds of missed calls and messages. I finally listened to a few voicemails. Abigail's tone evolved from angry to desperate as days passed. The Fosters had even gotten my parents' number, though thankfully my family knew better than to share my whereabouts. Eventually, I sent Abigail a brief email. "I'm safe. I need space. I've retained an attorney. Please direct any communication through them." I attached my lawyer's information and hit send before I could second-guess myself. Her response was immediate, a flood of messages ranging from pleading to accusing me of abandonment. I didn't reply. After years of fighting a losing battle, silence was my most powerful weapon. The divorce proceedings began smoothly enough. I wasn't interested in a drawn-out legal war. I just wanted out. But then Richard Foster stepped in, encouraging Abigail to fight for everything. What should have been straightforward became contentious. 2 months after my departure, I returned to finalize the sale of our apartment. As I was packing the last of my belongings, there was a knock at the door. I opened it to find Abigail standing there, looking smaller somehow. "You really meant it," she said quietly. "You're really leaving." "I left months ago," I replied. "This is just paperwork. We could still fix this," she offered, her voice trembling. "Dad says marriages go through rough patches." "Stop," I interrupted gently. "Listen to yourself. Even now, you're quoting your father instead of speaking your own thoughts." She fell silent, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I loved you, Abigail," I continued, "but I was never fighting for just your love. I was fighting your parents for a place in my own marriage. That's a battle no one should have to wage. They only wanted what was best for me. For us," she whispered. "No, they wanted control, and you gave it to them." As I closed the door on that chapter of my life, I felt nothing but relief. The months that followed brought challenges: rebuilding my life, processing the end of my marriage, finding a new place to call home. But each decision was mine alone, each step forward taken on my terms. I eventually settled in Denver permanently, advancing my career and even starting my own consulting business. I dated casually, but took my time before considering another serious relationship. The lessons I'd learned were too valuable to ignore. Sometimes I wonder if Abigail ever broke free from her parents' influence, if she ever recognized the patterns that destroyed our marriage. I hope she did, for her sake. As for me, I found something more valuable than the marriage I tried so desperately to save. I reclaimed my autonomy, my self-respect, and the freedom to chart my own course through life. No committee required.